everybody. How are you doing out there on the interweb? I have been back and forth across the continent since I talked to you last. Adam and I flew to San Luis Obispo for a movie premiere made by his adventure club, and then we flew back all in like 48 hours, and it was worth it at twice the exhaustion level. I see a count of 0 so far on our broadcast, but
there's a lag.
On the upside, I'm not as pixelated as I often am. Wendy from Guelph.
Just
boom,
beaten to the punch by Tiffany from New Zealand.
Hi,
everyone.
Someone from New Zealand beat you to Pennsylvania. How's that? Is that what happened? I don't know. Hello, everybody. Let's just start looking at where everybody's coming from. Hi, Melanie. Hi, Alexa. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Tiffany and Rachel, another Rachel and Monica and Karen and Kathy Kozak and Jordy and Jana and Ann. Hi, guys. And they're saying hi to Ro, too. It's kind of the old crowd. I feel like we could be like in a pub having our usual whatever. I don't know what you do in pubs. I keep reading about them. I grew up Mormon. I've never been to one. Kathy, aloha. Hawaii. Oh, prayers to the community of Squirrel Hill. Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to talk about that when we get up to our 100 folks. Yeah, I hate how every Sunday when we come together, there's always something awful to talk about. I suppose the world has always been that way. Anne-Marie. Oh, somebody's mentioning seeing. Sorry, I'm so farsighted since my eye surgery that I'm like, woo. Yeah, Adam went to the movie premiere, and then they had a dance party, and I thought, he'll stand by the wall all introverted like I always am. And so I left him there for 10 minutes, and I went back to rescue him, and he was like a dancing maniac. He was at the center of the action, dancing his heart out, bathed in sweat. He closed the place down that night. You never know. You never know what he's going to do. And then today he told us, there's Ro. Hi. He told us something about how yes, there are 2 versions of him. One is his real self, and one is, we thought he was saying derriere. It was, we were like, we had no idea. We kept trying to figure out what he was saying. And finally I said, can you spell it? And he was like, I don't know, DNA. He was talking about his true self and his DNA self. Don't know where he got that. I mean, seriously, we don't talk about it. He comes up with these things. Okay, we've got 125 people. Thank you all so much for joining us. And a few people have already mentioned the shootings that occurred this week. One at that grocery store and one at the synagogue. What's interesting to me is that so many of these shootings happen in churches and in schools. The person who shot up that grocery store originally went looking for a black church where you'd get a congregation of people that you know would be like-minded and probably ethnically similar as well. And then the synagogue, of course, is where you know you're going to find a bunch of Jewish people on the Sabbath. And then schools. And again, you're going to get a lot of people congregated. But what I was thinking about was how churches and schools are the places we go to educate ourselves, to wake up, to become greater than we are at this moment. And it's so interesting that those very places, they were used as sanctuaries. Of course, all the way through the Middle Ages, if you ran into a church and shouted sanctuary, nobody could hurt you. It was just an understood law of the land that you got sanctuary in there. And in these days, churches are the places that get bombed and shot up. I've been reading about been reading stories of the atrocities in Rwanda and how people ran to hide in the churches there. There were churches, of course, in Nazi Germany where people hid, where they actually boarded the doors and set fire to the churches. I hate bringing up these awful things, but this is the stuff that's happening. And I was thinking, yeah, it's a logistical thing for a mass murderer to go to those places. But I also thought, remember the very first gathering room we did? And it was about how to find the cathedral. And I talked about this recurring dream I have that I'm going through my house and there's a door I've never really opened, and I open it and it leads into a cathedral, and it's this glorious, huge space. And how in Jungian dream analysis, that is an aspect of me. Well, I also think that what happens in the world is a fractal of what happens within each of us. And let me talk about the word fractal for a minute, because I talk about it a lot. And it was used in the song Let It Go from the movie Frozen, which was for like anyone 3 years old and up. So it's in the vernacular, but a lot of people still don't know what it means. A fractal is a naturally occurring form that repeats itself at different scales of units of analysis, different scales of bigness. So a twig is a fractal form that's very small. That can grow into a branch, which has the same basic form, but at a very large scale. And then the trunk is a fractal of the branch. And fractals actually are the underlying structure of everything we see in nature, including our own bodies. So you can find all these different fractal forms in our own bodies and probably in our minds as well. So one of the interesting things to me about people who have enlightenment experiences is that they make this odd claim, but they make it very consistently across history, across different geographic places. Anita Morjani, my favorite cancer survivor, is the person who puts it most bluntly. She said that in her near-death experience, where she died of cancer, literally really, really terminal cancer. She was nothing but 85 pounds of tumors, really. And she had a near-death experience, went back into her body, and in 9 days, she was cancer-free after having had this profound near-death experience. And what she says, and it's echoed again in many, many different philosophies by many enlightened people, is that she realized in that zone between life and death that her soul is a fractal form of the entire universe, or maybe the multiverse, all the universes. And that in some way that I don't understand, if she sees something in the universe that she wants to change, she cannot cause it to change unless she changes it within herself. And if she changes something within herself, it fractals to the whole universe. So yeah, it's a kind of mind-bending idea. I could go into it at much greater length sometime because I think about it a lot. But suffice it to say that when I see something horrible in the external world, like the shootings at the store, the churches, the synagogues, I look for the source or for a fractal of that within myself. And what I saw, noticing that people get massacred in churches and synagogues and schools, is that it's when I try to wake up. It's when I try to elevate myself. It's when I try to enlarge my soul, to connect with the divine, or expand my mind until I can understand things that I don't yet understand. It's at those very times that the ego, the petty, paranoid, selfish, frightened self, gets most freaked out. So you can see this if you've ever had therapy, and the therapist sort of challenges your ideas about how to act in your family, and then you go home and you do something that breaks the rules of the family, like you respectfully but directly talk back to your father, let's say, and that's just not done in your family. At that point, you will have a massive psychological kickback. Oh my God, I can't believe I did that. I broke the rules. And if you keep doing it, the family will then attack you. How dare you? No one talks to father that way. And then if you do it to the patriarchal leaders of a community, the whole patriarchy will start to lash back at you. And basically, as you wake up, everything that is darkness in you starts to fight back. So I was thinking about the different fractal levels of reality, and how if you look at the level of people uniting churches and schools to enlighten themselves, that's when the darkness comes and tries to destroy that. If you look at the whole the whole sort of pyramid-shaped power structure that has pretty much always governed most of the societies we now know. So if you take the brutal repressive patriarchies, it's when egalitarian views, it's when kindness and compassion and softness start to rise, that the egalitarian system will, I mean, the patriarchal system will slap them down. When Jesus started saying, how about we all just be nice to each other? You know, the Romans had to get rid of that. It was giving people ideas. So they had to like rise against that. And it may just be that right now, as more and more people are trying to wake up, and ideas that were once very esoteric are now becoming commonplace. You know, Eckhart Tolle, when he wrote his book, The Power of Now, which is about his own awakening and how we can emulate it, they printed 4,000 copies. His publisher said, I think maybe we can sell 4,000 copies of this book. And he had to deliver them to bookstores himself in his car. And of course, it went on to sell, last I heard, like over 4 million copies in English and translated into like dozens of languages. So more people are trying to access this idea of awakening than ever before in history. Women have more voice than ever before in history. And it's at exactly these places that the unenlightened parts of the ego fight back and the unenlightened parts of humanity fight back. Like, so in the ego's voice, it is, don't let the consciousness awaken. The consciousness will destroy me. And that is actually true. So when you start to get close to a level of awakening, your own ego will attack you because it knows that when you wake up, you will shatter it. Maybe there's something happening that's fractaling from more and more people in more and more places that is causing the dark side to fight harder. Maybe this is actually a sign that something good is going on, and that the ancient dark rules are actually being broken for something that is more fair and just and good and true. So the way that I was talking to someone at breakfast who was very, very demoralized about the shootings, and she was saying, I guess we can go vote, and that's the only way that we can try to stop these terrible things that are happening. And that actually, frankly, makes me just want to give up. If all we can do, if the best we can do, I mean, go vote, please, please vote. Vote for your ideals, vote for whatever you believe in. Read Glennon Doyle's post about voting and vote. But that can't be all of it. That cannot be all I can do to fight these horrible tragedies and the victories of evil in the world. So for me, when I look at the macrocosm, and I want to change things, and I know I'm weak and small, in order to stop being depressed, I look at the microcosm. I look at the part of myself that is trying to rise into some kind of light, and then I look at the parts of myself that are still very unenlightened and that get selfish and peevish and violent and angry at all sorts of things. Today I went out into the trees and I sat down, and it took about 15 minutes to shake all the darkness out of my system. And when I did, there was a moment of clarity where I re-accessed a part of myself that is very core. And it feels literally like a spring. And I was thinking how the word for spring in French is source. And I felt like, this is why Jesus called it the spring of living water. But I love the fact that in French, the word source and spring are the same. Because as I touched that, I could feel it flowing into me. And then this interesting thing happens. Something happens with my eyes when I'm meditating sometimes. And I don't know if it's an optical illusion or what it is, but everything starts to look very pattern-like. And then it's like I'm looking into a kaleidoscope, and I can see that everything is just projected. And I can see that it's all moving through this projected kaleidoscope of consciousness. It's a really weird experience. It happens a lot, and I don't know exactly what it means. But as I did, I could feel the water, the living water, flowing into me and then out through all this projected consciousness. And I could feel, and the whole forest started to sigh the way a wind came up, or, coincidence. And I looked straight up, and right over me, this huge bird flew. I think it was an eagle, actually. This place is called Eagle Rock. I guess it had eagles. In that moment, I felt like it was something saying to me, every time one of us connects with the source, every time one of us gets still to go into the cathedral of the soul, every time one of us goes into education, into worship, into whatever it is that makes us transcend ourselves, something flows into the world. Source flows into the world, and it begins instantly to fractal outward into our families, into our communities, into our nations, and ultimately into the whole population of the world, I hope. I really think that we live in a time when consciousness is meant to awaken on a huge scale. You know that, I say it all the time. That's what we're doing here. And I think, honestly, that's one reason that there's so much horrible energy and antagonism rising. One of my therapists, I've had two in my life, she used to say, when you really move forward, everything in the system around you, your psychological system and your family system, will come at you with what she called change back attacks. They want you to go back to not being educated, not being enlightened. They want you to go back to being afraid and subservient. And she said, when you get a change back attack, you know you're making progress. So I think all these horrors around us and the whole political system and everything, it's a whole bunch of change back attacks going after something that is rising. And the way we can cope with it is to fractal the source by going back into it ourselves. And then it uses us. It comes out as an energy that flows. And for some of us, I've said this before, it might mean running for office. For some of us, it's just going out to vote. For some of us, it's just walking around and being a beacon for other people that we interact with. But every single person who touches source brings that into the world. And imagine if it's a spring of living water, and there are, let's say across the world, there are 1 million people who start to become sort of tributaries, and it starts to flow and flow and flow. What if it's 10 million? What if it's 100 million? What if it starts to be 1 out of every 10 people? It could not help but transform everything. And will it ever happen, you guys? I think it is happening. And I think the evidence is that there are so many change back attacks targeted directly at the places that used to be spared, even by war. So I think we're all fractaling our egos, and that's what's happening. And as we all wake up, the world wakes up. Now, I'd love to take any questions about this rather esoteric topic.
Okay, we have a question from Alexa, who is asking, what happens when you start to awaken but your unenlightened side takes over with fear and anxiety? How do you get back to yourself even if you feel like you ruined the awakening?
You can't ruin the awakening any more than you can ruin the sun by closing your eyes. Awakening, when you close your eyes, you're not bringing light into the world. You're looking at a light that was already there to begin with. So all that happens is you closed your eyes, and it's okay. The way you get over that, and it will only happen to you a couple of million times if you persist in this, is that if you fight it, you join it. So when you've fallen off the wagon, when you're bathed in fear and hatred and anger and all the bad things, what you must do is love yourself in the darkness. You have to look at the angry parts of you and say, it's all right. That's what you're designed to do. You're giving me a change back attack because you're my ego, and I'm here to transcend ego, and you're doing your job, and I love you. And you comfort the part of yourself that's in darkness. I know it's too hard for me, it's too hard to think about doing that to sociopaths and like mass murderers. I just don't buy that if we all got together and cuddled them, they'd be okay. But I think if we can be kind to the parts of ourselves that are unenlightened, we can easily overcome them, because the fact of loving is the source. So we immediately access the source. On a broader scale, I have to tell you guys a little weird story. I used to watch this show called Psychic Detectives, which was true stories of how psychics have helped people solve murders. And in one case, this psychic was trying to help the police catch a rapist murderer, and they couldn't catch him. He never left any evidence, but she had a really clear picture of him. So she had a bunch of students who were learning to be psychic, and they all got together and they held hands, and it showed this, and they prayed that he would, and I quote, feel the pain that he had caused others and turn himself into the police. And I was like, oh, please, like that is not going to happen. This guy is a stone cold sociopath. Well, the next day, a man came to a local police station with a knife wound in his gut. He'd been stabbing women to death. And he said he'd been stabbed by a brunette woman and they should go out and find her. And he had all the trophies from his murders in his car, which was exactly like the psychic had described it. So what happened was that he literally inflicted on himself the knife wound, and he turned himself into the police and they caught him. But it wasn't in that touchy-feely, icky-sticky way. Somehow consciousness worked on him to destroy his own evil. And that was kind of eye-opening to me. It's like the force works in mysterious ways. If we love ourselves and if we project that kindness, even the most psychopathic people, like the ego, ultimately turn on themselves and on one another. So the evil parts, the destructive parts of the ego ultimately will kill each other. So by loving ourselves in times of darkness, we start to project that kind of love, and the parts of ourselves and others that won't come into harmony end up destroying ourselves. There you go. Job done. Okay.
Can you read that?
No.
Donna asks, how do you go through the sadness, anger, and judgment that is caused by an event such as those this week to regain the access to the source?
Oh, for me, I had to be out in silence in nature, but everybody has different ways. For you, it might be a bath. I mean, there's a reason that immersion in water is such a powerful ritual for so many cultures. It's a literal re-experiencing of the womb and rebirth. For other people, you need to go punch a karate bag. I used to do that too. When I had a lot of anger, I'd go kick and punch my karate bag and get it out that way. However, you need to process it. Some people need to move, some people need to be still. Pay attention to your own signals and do what your body tells you. Always, though, with the objective of finding the source. And even you can picture it right now. If we all, like, you know that space goes out infinitely in all directions. That's kind of easy to imagine because we can look up at the stars and see how far it goes. But mathematically, it's just as possible to be infinitely small as it is infinitely large. So if we go into the center of ourselves, not out from ourselves, but into the center, deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, we start to access a part. If we go deep enough, there's an actual physical sensation of touching something very core. And you can tell when you get there because your breathing will change. And I felt this under the trees today, just before everything went kaleidoscope. And I hope you are still enough and pay attention long enough to get to that, because it's like turning on a switch that just floods you with calm and peace. And if you can't get there yourself, just keep surrounding yourself with comforting surroundings, with comforting people, with comforting books, with comforting music, and imagining going deeper and deeper and deeper. Eventually, it's like drilling for water. The water table may be up or it may be down, but eventually you will touch something and it will begin to flow. And you'll say, ah, oh, source, this is what they were talking about.
Ooh.
Oh,
Rachel McNamara asks, what about boundaries, Martha? Is it still okay to put boundaries in place so that we can connect to the source?
Absolutely must put boundaries in place. Absolutely must. Now, it's kind of paradoxical because when you get really, when you get into a space of being in the right hemisphere of your brain and very deeply in touch with primordial reality, you see that there is no boundary between anything. Everything is a field of energy that blends with every other field. You can't separate things from each other any more than you can separate two beams of light that have joined. However, in a psychological sense, as little monkey humans, we absolutely must not allow ourselves to be treated in ways that cause suffering. Here again, we come to the concept of fractaling. If you treat yourself horribly, so say, you've got these people who are racist and bigoted and anti-Semitic and everything. If you have any part of you that is attacking yourself for looking different from what you think perfection is, or for not having the right kind of mind or the right kind of money or the right kind of social class or whatever it is, if you attack yourself for anything, you are mirroring the attacks in the larger community. So by calming that, you start to create calm in the world. And then you have to create a boundary between that self-acceptance and that kind of peace and other people who would bring in hatred and malice. So you calm it in yourself by by separating them and then getting in touch with the good and soothing the bad. Separating yourself in order to make that happen is the very, very first step. So all the enlightened people, including Jesus again, have gone out to the wilderness by themselves to get it clear in here. Anita Morjani was dead and she went to a different place and she got it clear in here. And then she was able to slowly begin to project that into the world. And until you really have a solid way of returning to the source in yourself, you want to put up boundaries against people who are giving you the change back attacks. Use the change back attacks to be positive, to say, I know I'm making progress, but don't make yourself a victim of them. Don't play the victim role by using what Buddhists call idiot compassion and saying, okay, you're a mass murderer, but I'm going to be kind and loving to you. No, you're kind and loving to the mass murderer once he's in prison. Once he's behind bars, you can have all the love and compassion you want, but you need to stop harm from happening as step one. You stop it in here, then you stop it around yourself, and then it expands outward.
I have a relevant question on that from Heather. She asks, do you have any advice on how to avoid going down the path of anger and outrage? Sometimes I feel like the computer sucks me in. I keep getting so angry, I feel it in my bones like a toxin.
I think that we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I think that you shouldn't avoid your anger, and that it's not a toxin if it's directed. I think that we talked about our task is to transform the anger that is affliction into the anger that is determination to bring about change. So think of it as jet fuel. If you swallow it, it's toxic. But if you use it in a controlled combustion engine, it will drive things, your personal jetpack, it will drive things forward. So the idea is not to become so enraged that you join the oppressors, but to say, where would compassion stop this darkness from happening? And then use anger as the courage, to give you the courage to stand up against that. If you feel that kind of anger, it's trying to motivate you to do something. And most of us would rather let sleeping dogs lie and not get involved, right? But the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. If you feel that angry, turn it into action and use the anger as motivation and courage to get you through your fear of rocking the boat. And that way it won't ever poison you or others. It will move you and others forward. Yeah.
That's all we've got for questions.
Well, we have come to the end of the half hour anyway. And as I said at the beginning, I wish that I could stop talking about these horrors that keep occurring week after week. But I also felt that, first of all, so many of my friends were absolutely devastated yesterday, that I wanted to speak to all of you out there. And secondly, this concept of changing the world by changing the self, and the fact that it brings in the world the same change back attacks that it brings in the self, that really feels to me like something worth thinking about. So this week, as we go about our daily lives, this is what I'd like us to all consider. Where do we see things that make us angry, sad, and fearful in the world around us? where are we doing those very things to ourselves? Where are we attacking ourselves in the very areas that are trying to grow, to gain more light, to gain more knowledge, to transcend, to awaken? How can we love ourselves enough to include in our love even the change back attack coming from the ego? And once we do that, that gives us a fractal image of how to do it in the larger community and in the larger population. So this week, let's all touch the source inside ourselves, find a way to pacify and calm and love ourselves, and then watch how the force uses us in our small communities, in our large communities, to make changes, to teach us what to do in order to bring all of humanity into this transcendence that is going past our most depressing and frightening side as humans and into the side that we've only just begun to realize, which is the light. So
and vote,
vote, and I'll see you guys next week.